Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Monday, but that doesn't actually matter because the whole today, what today's day is supposed to be a thing where I do like a show that's supposed to happen on those days, and that really only applies for How to Bass, which I do on Fridays. I used to have a whole bunch of stuff that I did, but then I kind of fell out of doing it. That's my bad, but you know, that's how that works. And now that weird echo's gone. Anyway, today is Monday, but it's time for the making of Deathblow Celldweller featuring Celldweller Part 2. This is the mixing and mastering. Yeah. So this one's a little bit more it's a little bit closer to the idea of how the traditional methods are supposed to work for in terms of mixing and mastering than Codename Hurricane was, but not by much. My phone. And anyway, so let's just get to it. So like Codename Hurricane, what I'm primarily going to focus on is how the drums interact with everything, because in this kind of electronic music, the drums are the loudest and most disruptive things in the whole thing. So we're going to focus mostly on that. So let's look at the drop, which I've already gone and muted everything. Good times. So now I'm going to mute the side channel because, like Codename Hurricane, the way that the mixer is laid out is that I have this channel that I refer to as the side channel, which is where everything is being side chained. By everything, I mean all the synths. And also partially guitar, but not vocals, because there's vocals in this track, which is a very unique thing for me. I say partially guitars because when I mute this, I hear the drums by themselves, but we also hear a little bit of guitar. And that's because, like the vocals, the guitars, I wanted them to be a very prominent and main element in the track, which meant that they could not have been sidechained as hard as everything else. The vocals aren't sidechained at all. They're not even going in the sidechain channel. They're totally on top of everything. The guitars are going on the sidechain channel and also into the master. Phone. All right, so yeah, so here's the guitar channel right here. And over here, you see I have to send the volumes different for the master and the sidechain. It's going quite quietly into the master, but what it does is it creates a sort of like basically a low ceiling. And now the sidechaining is still stacking on top of that, so it makes it a little bit louder, but it's not exactly a one-to-one, like, oh, this is the lowest and this is the maximus. The lowest and the maximum. I said maximus, but that's not what I meant to say. And so that this is not quite like visually what you think is happening, but you can still mess with it to get the result that you want. You just gotta play with it a little bit until it gets comfortable. But putting up in a master like that pretty much ensures that it will still have the master like that. Yes. These are things that I say. So I'm gonna mute the guitars just because I want only to hear the drums right now. So this was set up a little less smart than Codename Hurricane. The sidechain channel is below the drum cluster, which I don't know why I did that, but it still had the same relative effect of being that like the kick and the snare are still the lowest sequenced objects in the sidechain channel. Which I mean by that is if you go to the sidechain, we see that if I put in number one is going to be the kick drum, no matter what, because it's the lowest ranked number. Like if sequentially, like here, this is the kick drum channel, and then over here is the snare channel. So these are the two lowest things. No matter what I put in over here, they're going to be numerically lower than that. So that means it's going to show up in the list first, like so. And then here's all the other things. So that's what that is. And so like I said, it still has the same result of being below everything, so that it doesn't change everything. Because if I had this later, if I had the sidechain channel like after everything, and I put in new elements, it would change the list and it would change the elements, and then like suddenly the guitars would be sidechaining the drums or something like that. It'd be weird. Yes, but I'm able to do the thing with the guitar where I put it in the sidechain channel and the master channel, because in the limiters, in the limit section, I have the attack all the way off, because in the limit section, the attack actually is like delayed look ahead. And I mean that it says that it will delay the audio, but the compression will still start when the original audio played, but then we'll hear the audio come in right when the compression actually kicks in fully. But that's all really all well and cool, except that for what we're doing, that basically means that it adds in actual latency into the sound. So if I were to do what I was doing with doing this and then putting it through the master, you get phase cancellation, and it's not a good time. Doing it like this, though, there is no phase cancellation because there's no latency being introduced by the compressor, by the limiters. And also lets me do stuff like this, which is to, on the wet dry the thingy, I brought it down a little bit because I was being lazy and I didn't want to come in here and adjust the threshold and release and all that, threshold and ratio. So I just brought it down here so the effect was less on the whole. Yes. So in the drums, I have the main elements, but then I also have the superior drummer elements like I do in most of my tracks, but those were actually somewhat of an afterthought. Like they came in a bit later. It was actually a suggestion by the Fixed people that I added more rock drums to make it fill out, and they're right, so I did that. And that's these guys. It's literally only cymbals, and so I put them all out back here. And superior drummer, the way a superior drummer works is being, through mic positioning and not so much instrument, individual instrument channels. So I just allowed a whole lot of room in FL for that all to happen. Then I brought it back to a channel, all to one channel. Then I processed it and sidechained it because I sidechained elements in the drums as well. And then I brought that back to the drum master, which is right next to the sidechain channel, which has the Maximus and it's being compressed and all good stuff. So I do sidechaining to the drum elements as well. And I mentioned just now that I did that to the superior drummer stuff, but I also did it to the regular stuff. So in here I have hats, and all these hats I'm routing into one hat channel, and then the hat channel's that's where all that reverb's coming from. That's all hat reverb. I have a convolver, and I also have a shimmer, a little bit on, a little bit off, like, set to change or whatever. The point of doing this, though, is that whenever you hear a track, it's got like nice full high range presence. That's mostly the result of either, putting a whole bunch of white noise in there and spreading it out and having a good time, or it's the hats with reverb. So I do that, but I also sidechain it because I want the pulsing sort of nature of it to happen as well. I sidechain it by the kick and the snare. And that sound you're hearing at the beginning whenever I hit play is the end of the vocals. You in the crew deliver a deathblow. You in blow. That's what that was, if you're curious. So I do that, and then that routes into the channel. So like basically all the elements that I want to sidechain that are drums, I have to do individually because I'm not routing it through the main sidechain channel. Because the main sidechain channel goes right to the master, and I want all the drum elements to go to the drum master. The drum kind of has its own the drums all have its own separate universe, basically. And things that I consider drums. So that's cool. Now, the kick is kind of interesting. I made it out of two things. I made it out of this, which is a bass drum preset. It was a preset. I messed with it. Bass drum is cool. I guess I'll cover this in the sound design thing, like how this works, what I did with it. I don't really remember what I did with it, but I can explain what all the elements are, what they do, and how they affect this sound. And then I have a top kick somewhere. Where is it? This guy. Like I mentioned in the first part of the making of, this is a crispy dinner kick from the pack called Crispy Dinner or something. Someone gave this to me. I don't know where it's from, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. And then the snare is one thing. That's the only snare in this entire track. And it's got some reverb too. It's got some reverb, but it's very closely EQ'd in the EQ equalizer section of the Fruity Convolver, which is what I'm using to do reverb. It's also EQ'd and stuff like that. But it was largely what I wanted to be at the beginning anyway. I'm pretty sure I'm pitching it up a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Tiny bit. And so the drums are all going into the master, the drum master. So what I do with these is that what I'll either do is I'll either push the gain up or I'll move this point over so that the largest peaks on each section of the bands are hitting at 0 dB for those bands. I also set the bands, like the actual sections, to be split so that the bass area, it does not have any of the snare in it, and then the mids only have the snare, and the highs can be really wherever I want to have it. It's like watch what happens when I play it. This is actually way hugely below where the snare is. And that's because I don't have this in linear phase mode. You can actually have the EQ in linear phase mode where these splits will not be minimum phase like a regular EQ split. It'll be linear phase, which means you can have it 100% sharp. But as we don't have it 100% sharp, it means it's a little bit misleading to see like this very straight line be there, because it's not straight. It's more like a cone kind of thing. And so that means I want to have it as far away from the snare like fundamental tone as I can to ensure that it doesn't get into the bass area at all, which is fine. It's pretty much easy because the snare was very high pitched and the bass is very low pitched. So that worked out. You can have a little bit of the kick in the mids. That's fine. Like, cause there's still mids in the kick, but they're not going to interfere with the snare at all. So here I have the low end peaking up at 0 dB almost, the snare picking up at 0 dB, and then the hats and stuff. And this is mostly just the high end of the kick that's peaking up here like that, and that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily like a rule being like, okay, I want all the bands to be at 0 dB. I want the mids and the lows to be at 0 dB, but the highs you really just want to put them where you want to put them. You move it around and do some compression and then see what sounds good, like what you want to have it. Because sometimes it'll work, but other times you'll just get a huge washy, tinny sound, and you don't want to do that. So it should be pretty obvious when you do that, and it's something that sounds like shit. So that's, one of those intuitive things us producers can do. And then in the master channel, I bumped the below 0 dB compression just a little bit, and then I also just am not compressing above 0 dB, but I am using the soft saturation to cut off the peaks, of which you can see there are not that many. So the dynamic range between the highest and lowest bits of the drums are still pretty huge. Mind you, it's still being compressed by the main compressor in the master. All this is. This doesn't actually need to be here anymore. Don't need that. Don't need that. Do need that. Indeed. So to recap, all the things that aren't the kicks and the snares, which are primarily hats, cymbals, and rides, are getting sidechained. They're also getting a lot of reverb applied to it, and the sidechaining is happening post-reverb, so that the reverb is being, pulsed. That's all going into the drum master, that's all going out to the master. And then the kick and the snare are going out into the main track sidechaining, which means everything is being sidechained by it. And as far as main track mixing go, much like Codename Hurricane, this is more or less the end of it, because each individual aspect of the sounds that existed are pretty much determined by their own individual sound design, except for the vocals. Vocals were a pretty big part of this. So let's talk about vocals. I split the vocal. Okay, so vocal story. So vocal story is this was determined to be a collaboration with Clayton, the Celldweller, and I gave him the track and he sang over it, and that was all well and good. He sent me the vocals and a bunch of stems for the vocals, but I didn't use the stems. I just used the main vocals because they were so perfect. They were so good. Everything about it was wonderful, and it was just awesome. I am busy. I am in the middle of recording something. What was I saying? So I set this up into 2 bits. Basically the verses quote unquote, and then the choruses. The choruses are there because I pumped them up a little bit. The chorus actually has more going on in it than the rest of the track. Like the drops are nice, but the chorus is heavy, like even without the vocals. Let's turn on the vocals for a second. There's a lot of stuff going on, and like again, this is all possible because of the massive amount of sidechain that's happening. Like usual. Carving out a hole in the spectrum that fits, the loudest elements, much like Codename Hurricane. This is going to be pretty similar for the rest of the tracks, but I'm going to still cover it anyway. So that's existing there, and then I put the vocals on top of it. Lots of reverb. So the choruses I put out into its own channel. So here, insert 60 is the main vocal channel. This is where I put the vocals, and it was fine. I did a little bit of EQing, like a tiniest bit, just to compensate for the amount of compression that I have on everything, because I put the vocals in after I did everything else, which meant that I had the completed chain, and so it obviously, like, it was going to be colored by what I did in such a way that Clayton was not prepared for. So I did that, and then I just EQ'd it a little bit. I didn't have to EQ it a lot, like, because it was already pretty good. And then it was determined that the choruses need to be bigger for the vocals. So I did a little bit of extra compression on the chorus vocals. It's the tiniest bit. It was mostly stereo separation. In fact, it looks to be incredibly stereo, like, just only stereo separation. The lows are centered, the mids and the highs are spread out a little bit, and a tiny section bit of reverb. And then EQ'd it pretty heavily on the highs, because the chorus section is full of a lot of high frequency action. So I need to compensate it by increasing the amount of highs on the vocals. And the only reason why that works is because of the kind of compression I have in the master. And the only reason why this works at all is because of the kind of compression I have in the master. Because the vocals go straight into it. And they also go in the sidechain, I'm noticing. So they're going into the sidechain and the master pretty much evenly, which more or less means that we're hearing, like, I think this might work out to be just the regular signal. Because, like I mentioned before about doing the guitars like this, if the vocals are going into the sidechain channel and they're being sidechained by kicking the snare, that means that whenever the kick and snare are happening, that signal is being brought down, but we still have the signal in the main signal. So what you might be thinking is that, okay, cool, that means if I combine the two, that means that it's actually going to be twice as loud. And then when the kick and the snare happen, it's only going to be one regular amount of loud. And you're completely right. And the reason why that's not destroying everything is because it's being compressed by the master. So that's why, like, that stuff still works out. So let's look at the master and see why this is happening, like why this is functional at all. I want to look at this low end here for a second. So this is the low end of the whole track of everything. And you can very clearly see these big peaks come in where the kick drum is already, like, the low end of the kick drum is going into the master already at 0 dB. So when that kick hits, it's pretty much by itself because it's side chaining everything else, including the other bass frequencies. So that means that it's by itself and the compression is not really doing anything. Because this is actually expansion in this regard, because I brought the point over, which means that when the signal comes in, it would go in, let's say if it came in at -3 dB, it's actually being pulled up now to 0 dB. So that's why that happens. The reason why I did this, though, is because you can see this green element, the green section over the beige. The beige is the incoming signal, and then the green element is the outgoing signal. And in the kick section here, this kick happens, it goes up, and then the green happens. And the green is basically the bass that's happening in between the kicks and the snares. And I wanted that to be on the level with the kicks so that the bass just seems smooth and even the whole time. So I basically brought the point over until it gets to about here. So that's like what, -6. Yeah, it doesn't go up all the way, but it goes up enough so that the bass is pretty present. And what's pretty interesting is that you still see these massive holes in here, and those massive holes are from the snare, because the snare is sidechaining everything, including the bass. So that means that whenever the snare happens, it kills the bass, but the bass doesn't come back. And so you might be thinking, well, doesn't that just destroy your whole plan of being like smooth bass? And the answer to that is yeah, a little, but what it does is it makes the snare feel like it has bass frequencies. Because if the bass cuts out when the snare happens, it sounds like our brains fill in for a second, and it's like it makes the snare feel snappier, even though the snare doesn't actually have any frequencies that low. So it's pretty cool. And the mids are a little bit more free for all, because the mids, you'd think, okay, cool, the same thing only for like the snare, except that the mids also contain every single thing in the track, like all the things. The splits are a little bit less ridiculous. I think I'm still in minimum phase mode. Yeah, so the snare transient fundamental tone is right on the edge of the cut here. So most things are in the mids, like the guitars, the vocals, the synths, just all the stuff's in the mids. So putting them all together is you gotta kind of be a bit careful. You can actually see that I have a large amount of attack happening in the highs and in the mids. And this actually keeps it pretty smooth. Like it, I can push it kind of hard, but I don't need to push it that hard. I'm also soft saturating the mids, like as it's going above 0 dB, and then also the master. Here, though, we can see a pretty important thing. So when everything is huge and together, and the snares are peaking above way hugely, and then the compression and the soft saturation is bringing it down. Everything else in here kind of is only just above 0 dB in the mids, and everything else also drops off when there aren't vocals. It's like when there aren't vocals, things are pretty much below 0 dB in the mids, but when the vocals happen, it's right up on there. And the snares, of course, cutting in there. But the fact of the matter is that the sound that we like out of the snare, that kind of sort of thing that we like, is a product of distortion. That's a distorted snare sound. So distorting it a little tiniest extra bit in the mids doesn't destroy everything. It doesn't make it a bad choice. Indeed. So that's what happening. And I'm pushing it up a little bit, like this curve, just kind of bringing it out the tiniest bit. Like it gives us that sort of slow compression feel. And the highs are similarly the Wild West, where we basically we want to bring it up a little bit, like because after we bring up the lows and the highs, or the lows and the mids rather, it starts to sound muddy. It starts to sound like because it sounds like there's no highs because it sounds way too round. And so we got to bring up the highs a bit to compensate for that. Kind of like EQing. Like we're basically just EQing right now with what we do with the highs. But we want to be careful about it because if we do it too much, then too much high will sound like washy and sound like there's not enough bass or lows. Because we do want to bring it up a little bit. And then in the master, I'm doing the Codename Hurricane thing where I'm just not compressing at all, and I'm distorting it going out. So the difference between this one and Codename Hurricane is that I did this via soft saturation and not via the 32-bit, 24-bit conversion. In Codename Hurricane, I literally was peaking the track. The track was clipping. It clipped audio. That's how I did that. But this one was not. And there's a bit of a difference behind that. So Codename Hurricane, like I said, when I was doing Hurricane, it was a bit of a gamble. It was a bit of, okay, cool, it sounds good to me, and I'm going to pretty much assume that it will sound good for everyone else. And for the most part, it does. Except for the fact that it sounds like kind of crappy on some parts on YouTube and SoundCloud. And the reason why that is because YouTube and SoundCloud, they did their conversion to make it their MP3 quality or whatever, 128 kbps on their audio side. And that conversion is different than FL's conversion to MP3 or whatever. Like a little bit different because on the MP3s, particular parts that sound distorted and bad on the SoundCloud and YouTube don't sound like that, like on the 320s, and certainly not on the waveforms. The waveforms sound exactly like you want them to on pretty much every system that I want them to, and that kind of thing. However, in this method, we're using soft saturation, which means that it's basically doing the same thing. It is distorting. It's a kind of distortion, but it will be the same every time because it's happening before you render. It's happening like on purpose. So it's going to distort it as one particular way, and then it's going to print this distortion in this one particular way, and then it'll still sound that way pretty much on all the things, or at least better than just clipping would in that particular regard. And so you're thinking, well, why did I just do that for Codename Hurricane? That's because the clipping it sounded better. And that's because of the particular makeup of things in Codename Hurricane. Like I tried that with this track. Actually, a big reason why I didn't do that is because of vocals. This track having vocals pretty much negated that happening. Vocals tend to distort more. Like a track with vocals will distort more and more noticeably when you do that kind of thing. And you think it would do it with this as well. But fortunately, the kind of quality that Clay's vocals have means that even a tiniest bit of like basically harmonic excitement because that's what distortion does, is it adds harmonics to things. This tiniest bit that it added into the vocals as a result of this complemented the sound of his voice, especially when he does the growly screamy things, which are really cool. So that's why that works out. And I'm also saying that I have the EQ. The EQ is very slight, sort of like, I wanted a tiny moment, whatever. And like I did a little bit of, I was going to like, curb the low end, but I ended up not doing it. So this position is not doing it. And that's fine. Then you see that I have two Maximuses. I have two of them. And the only difference between these two is that one of them cuts off like this with the soft saturation. The other one cuts off with actual compression. And this is taken care of by this automation here, this whole line right there. And this, because basically what I did is I automated the wet dry of the Maximus, and then I connected the other one to the same one, and then inverted it in the controller linking options. 1 minus input creates inversion. So that means that when this one goes up, one of them goes up and the other one goes down. And this is because I still wanted to have, like, because you notice that Codename Hurricane has a lot of quiet moments. So, you know, the piano outro, the stringy intro, that kind of thing, the breakdowns. And they're all not being distorted, because that's the reason why I did this, is because I didn't want to distort the break elements when they were by themselves, because they would distort. And it's like this section. So right when the main drums kicked in and the drops and the drop elements had all of it like fully open, because there's filtering happening, and the vocals came in, pretty much when like enough of the main track elements came in, I switched over to the other Maximus, the one that let it distort basically. And then this first one, I didn't do that, but I still wanted it to be compressed. I still wanted the things to be loud and heavy and huge, but there wasn't a lot of, since there wasn't a lot of high frequency action happening, the extra harmonics that'd be added in as a result of distortion would be way more noticeable, because there aren't enough high frequency to like hide it behind. So I used actual compression, which is a sense that actual limiting, more or less, this result. This big line here saying that you're not going above 0 dB, and you will also not distort, because in doing so, compression in this example is still basically wave shaping, except that we do it with attack and release and decay, which means that the waves have time to move around, while the volume levels have time to move around as such, so that it doesn't distort if you're doing it right. And that's why I do that. And in the Codename Hurricane, I still had the same, you know, a desire. I had moments that I wanted to keep quiet, and so what I just kept it below 0 dB. I just ensured that they were all below 0 dB, so that they did not clip above it, or if they did, it wasn't super bad. So I did that here. And did that whole part, and then also the part of the outro. And then when the big kick came in, I did that too. Because when the large and louder elements happen, that like, because these are low pass kicks. But whenever they comes in at the right like level and the right loud, like the full amount of loudness, on the non-distorting compressor, we get the sort of compression artifact of pumping. And you might be thinking, well, you're doing that anyway because you're side chaining. The side chaining is controlled. The pumping is not. So that caused problems. That's why I did that. So let's talk about the guitars just briefly. A lot of the guitar discussion will take place during the sound design portion. So right off the bat, one of the big like metal mixing faux pas is to have bass in your guitar. And I do. And the big metal faux pas is to let the bass guitar do its job, which normally is fine, because one thing you can do in metal mixing is you can have your guitar with a patch, and then you have your bass, and you have your bass patch, but then you also run the bass patch through a separate instance of the guitar tone, so that like the bass is distorted with the exact same patch, and it fits together with the guitar really well. You gotta mix it a little bit, but it'll still do it. There's no bass guitar in this track, so that wasn't ever going to happen. And then again as well, like this track its whole point was like, oh my god, there's a guitar in this track, Seamless, what are you doing? So I have to the guitars have to be really present and really like forceful, which meant that its bass frequencies had to sort of not necessarily take precedence, but it needs to be present in that regard. Also a huge amount of high end. Like the guitars in metal don't really have a large amount. If you ever listen to like a metal guitar stem by itself, it's usually pretty quiet and the high end. Like it cuts off, like it sounds hilariously empty by itself. And that's because in metal, like the guitars are there's usually more than one guitar. Like you have your rhythm guitar, and you have your lead guitar, and leads will kind of fit in the high end. And there's vocals that'll fit in the high end, and then you have drums and cymbals and shit that'll fit in the high end. A lot of stuff that goes in the high end that's not guitars. Because if you let them, guitars can be a full spectrum instrument, and then you got a lot of mixing problems. So you got to deal with that. And one of the ways to deal with that is to just be like, no bass, no highs, only mids. And then you have your bass guitar, you have guitar, cymbals and hi-hats, the vocals and stuff, and then presumably if the music is written as such, it'll all fit together and it'll be nice. And this, not so much, because pretty much all those problems to take care of through copious amounts of multi-band compression. This will be covered more in the sound design portion, but I have this one bass that's pretty much exclusively around for the guitar. That guy. Yeah. And like I had said before, I'll talk about that in the sound design. I already covered what the guitar was in the first part, and this is about mixing and mastering, which we pretty much already talked about. We talked about pretty much everything in here. If you have any questions about any of this and anything I may have missed about what you wanted to know about this, let me know and I'll try to answer them. And as usual, have a nice day.